morning. I know people will be coming in the next couple minutes. Everyone give a big thumbs up and hand clap for Dawn Lemons, who is our awesome support on this call. She's going to be letting people in on our Zoom these next couple minutes as people are registering and getting on. So we are recording so that we can share with other folks in our conference at a future date. So if you are okay with us recording, give me a thumbs up, okay? Okay. Oh, look at you. You're getting fancy with your Zoom too, with putting the little emoji thing there. Okay, so folks will be coming on the next minute or two, but let's officially begin now that Nancy has all welcomed us. So thanks, Nancy, on being our hospitality chairperson. No, but I'm really, really glad that you're here. So let's begin, okay? I'm going to open with a word of prayer, and then we'll begin our vital conversation, okay? All right, let's pray. Gracious God, we just thank you for the time to gather in this way, and we trust that as we gather, you are present with us. We ask your grace, your peace, your blessing upon our conversation today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, welcome friends. This is another installment of Vital Conversations, and we do this every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Mountain Time, and so we're so glad that you're able to kind of shape out some time to join us live. And for those that will be watching this afterwards, thanks for just taking the opportunity to avail yourself of some of these resources. Today we are very fortunate and blessed to have with us Reverend Jeff Campbell, who is the Executive Director of Strategic Programming for the General Board of Discipleship of the United Methodist Church. And if I had a penny for every part of Jeff's title, I would be a millionaire. So now, Jeff, we are excited to have you come and talk with us. I've known Jeff as a pastor. I've known him in his role with the General Board, and he's effective, he's dynamic. You're really going to enjoy what he's going to share with us today. So I want to turn it over to him. We're going to talk really about, discipleship, particularly discipleship in this time and discipleship moving forward. So he's going to share with us some of the things that are on his heart, maybe some resources that we can take advantage of from the General Board. This is going to be his time to share with us. If you have a question, we're going to leave time at the end as well for a little Q&A. But if you've got something, I'll try and monitor the chat box. So if you want to put that in the chat, we'll try and get to those questions at the end. If not, we'll have a time of live Q&A. So everybody give a big thumbs up or hand clap to welcome Reverend Jeff Campbell to be part of our conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And thank you, Michael, for the invitation. I really appreciate this. It's good to see so many beautiful faces from another part of the Methodist connection. So it's just good to be with you today. I thought I'd kind of break up my talk into 3 sections for today. And I don't know, Michael, if you want to do questions in between each or hold them till the end. I'll leave depending on how many questions are generated. But the 3 sections I thought would be intentional discipleship systems or pathways, because even though we're doing things completely differently now, we still need to know the basics and how we're doing them before you use tools virtually. Then I wanted to spend some time on COVID-19 specific resources that we have, and that you can pretty much find at umcdiscipleship.org. And then lastly, I thought I'd spend some time on kind of what's next after the crisis. What kind of discipleship pieces should we be thinking about now and beginning to plan for now? So those are the 3 areas. And then Michael, just interrupt me as people have questions. The first piece, just intentional discipleship systems, is one of our strategic priorities at Discipleship Ministries. And when we began this conversation, I'd say 4 years ago, I called every district, and there are 400 plus in the US, and just asked how many of your churches have a discipleship system or discipleship pathway. And at that point, I think probably less than 2% across the country knew what that was or had one. Some would say we have it, but it's on a shelf somewhere. It's a piece of paper that we compiled. But very few had this understanding of a discipleship system or pathway. And I want to start there because it doesn't matter the tools and the virtual piece that we go into when we get into digital discipleship if we don't have these basics understood now with our leaders. And the resources that we created around this are on seeallthepeople.org. So this is one of the first, which is developing an intentional discipleship system. It's a free PDF there. And it kind of walks you through the basics of a discipleship system. When we began this conversation, I'd say 5 years ago, we visited local churches, districts, conference offices, and began to have this kind of what are the discipleship needs? And right away, within the first minute or so, someone would always say, well, what is a disciple anyway? And what we quickly came to realize that if we don't know what a disciple is, we don't have to make them. And then within 2 or 3 more minutes in the conversation, and this would be church leaders, bishops, DSs, someone would say, and how do we really know how disciples are formed? And if we don't know how they're formed, we don't have to make them either. So we quickly realized that it was really important to bring clarity or help people determine the clarity for their local context on what is a disciple, how are they formed. But then we quickly realized in the pursuing conversations that people had lost an understanding of why we're even called to make disciples. And if we're honest, a lot of folks would say, I'm actually uncomfortable with making disciples. And a lot of good Methodist folks would actually say, I'm just respectful. I have my faith. I don't want to impose my faith on others. And so discipleship in general would be kind of an uncomfortable conversation that we didn't want to go there. So I think it's really important for us to either discover our why for making disciples, and I think it's unique for each person, for each congregation, or in some instances, rediscover our why. Because when we were having these conversations, we'd quickly realize people would say things like, I don't know, I've been here all my life. My parents were here, my grandparents were here. I'm just here. Nobody's ever asked me why I'm here. Why am I a disciple? And why do I feel called to make disciples? So this resource is primarily getting clarity on the what, the why, and the how of making disciples. And in it, we offer basic guidelines. It's not meant to be, take this and apply it to your church. It's meant for you to work through with your leaders, ask these questions, and begin to develop a discipleship system or pathway that is unique to your congregation as you and your leaders decide what kind of disciples are we a part of forming in our church. Because that's something you have to wrestle with. Whether wherever you are on the spectrum of theology or wherever you are on this, your church needs to wrestle with what kind of disciples are we making? What kind do we feel called to make? And sometimes I get a little pushback on the word use of systems, discipleship systems or pathways. But whether you know it or not, you already have a discipleship system in your church, and it produces exactly what it's designed to produce. So what we're just trying to do is say, how do we as leaders become more intentional about how disciples are formed? As we asked leaders, they would say, well, we don't really know. People come into the church. We try to greet them lovingly. Maybe they join a choir or a small group, and then somehow they become a disciple. We just don't know. And what we're trying to do is help us be more intentional about the how and knowing how we walk people from one stage of faith to another. And the book also does a good job of that, kind of laying out searching, exploring, beginning, growing, and maturing as a disciple. So these are all kind of the fundamental questions each of us as leaders have to wrestle with, understand for ourselves, build this kind of system or pathway in our church that not just us as leaders, but the whole church embraces and begins to have clarity around. Well, we call a disciple in our church one who is a follower of Jesus, who puts their faith into action daily. You know, whatever it is, you want your church all the way through to the pews to understand what a disciple is and why we're called to make them. And in the sharing of this, in the rediscovering of our why or discovering our why, what we also found in those conversations was there was a new energy. People would share stories that they hadn't thought of for years, of how they were having a rough time in their life. They had left the church, they came back, or someone special to them invited them to the church. And it was 20 years ago and they hadn't thought about that in a while. And what that gets to is that basic why of being disciples and making disciples, which we have to understand in order to share it with other people. So you can't share what you don't have. So we're trying to help people tap back into that that why of being a disciple and making disciples. So I'd say that's the first piece that I would share that's extremely important for you and all of your leaders to wrestle with and to begin to develop. So let me just pause there, because that's kind of the first third of this, and see what kind of questions were coming in, if any.
Nothing on the chat box now. Feel free to put it in, friends, but also if you want to talk more specifically or have a question about intentional discipleship systems, let's do that now. I'll try and monitor the time. We do have a 12:30 stop. So I don't want to be rude if I've got to say we got to move on to the next round, but if you got a question, go ahead, throw it out there for Jeff.
Where did you say we could get that book?
Sure. These are all at seeallthepeople.org.
See all the people.
And there's lots of free downloads there. You can also order the book, and we just charge what it costs us to ship it to you and print it. But it is a free PDF, and all of the resources around discipleship systems are free PDFs that you can download there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, can you give us an example? Like, I know you did a little bit with, trying to name what a disciple is for a church. Can you give like where have you seen another example of just a varying degree of what a discipleship system would look like? What does it look like in a small church, maybe a medium church? Can you give us an example of some of what you've seen?
Sure. And we've actually, at seeallthepeople.org, we've been collecting models from churches across the connection. So there's a lot of examples at seeallthepeople.org. The one that we lift up in the book, which is really just a starting place, is Phil Maynard's graph on intentional discipleship, which looks something like this. And it talks about stages of faith. So across the top is searching, exploring, beginning, growing, maturing. Across the one side here, we talk about the characteristics of a disciple. So a disciple worships, is doing spiritual practices, service, and generosity, as well as becoming more Christ-like. And the idea is we understand where people are on our pathway, and we're trying to help them take the right next step for them. So we lift up closely, worship is such an important place where disciples are formed. Community, belonging, hospitality, that however you call that, and then spiritual disciplines, service, generosity, and Christ-like. And this is like a starting place. This is the starting conversation for churches. You would take Phil Maynard's or this piece that we offer and you would begin to edit it based on your church, your context, the words that you use, the characteristics of a disciple that you think are important, and you begin to build your discipleship system or pathway in that way. Small, medium, large churches, doesn't matter the size, you just need to know what is the process by which a new person comes into faith, what are the areas that we're trying to help them grow as leaders, and how are we making sure our leaders provide those opportunities for growth as disciples. So it's just helping us be more intentional around that process.
I really like that because it allows for unique context too, right, Jeff? That, you know, you're not trying to say specific, like it gives room and freedom to let people own their unique community and context, right?
Absolutely.
But I like some of those handles, some of those major signs or part of those pathways that help to give a little bit of, you know, guardrails or, you know, the lines in the road that kind of shape a little bit. Here are some good sort of larger words, but also it gives that freedom to let each sort of local church name it for who they are.
Right. I think there's a question on FUMC Lafayette.
Yeah, okay.
So what I'm wondering about is when people come in at different points, so into the life of the church, there may be a more mature disciple who's entering the life of the church for the first time. So how do we connect people in the appropriate place of how they're relating with the church, but also the appropriate, I don't know, level of discipleship?
Right. And that's true of all of our folks, really. And if we're honest, our folks are at various levels of discipleship. I mean, and it's not connected to age necessarily. You can have, particularly nowadays, more and more people are coming to our church having never been to church. So you can have essentially a 30, 40, 50-year-old who's a seeker or just beginning in the faith. You could have a 80, 90-year-old who's just starting out too. So this helps us begin to think about stages of growth. One of the ways we encourage you to do that is through your new member or new disciple classes. It's an orientation. It's helping people begin to self-identify and share with the leaders where they are. You know, what is their knowledge level for worship or spiritual disciplines or giving or service? And the leader should then be able to see where they are on the spectrum. But then more importantly, as we preach, as we teach, we should always be helping people self-reflect. Where are they in these various areas of growth as a disciple, and offering next steps. You know, if you are a beginner and this is brand new to you, here's Bible 101. If you are still growing in your faith and you feel like you know and understand the Bible well, here's kind of the next step. If you're maturing, here's another kind of piece for you. What we found is whenever you offer a Bible 101 kind of class, everyone comes. No one thinks they're really knowledgeable about the Bible. And that's a good place to be. So sometimes you can use the lowest common denominator as a place to teach or preach from, never assuming where people are. But likewise, and what we're seeing with, say, new churches who focus solely on searching and exploring people, eventually those people grow in their faith. And if the sermon and everything is all geared towards searching and exploring, then the growing and maturing folks will leave. They'll essentially say, and you can, if I unmuted you all and I said they'll leave because they say they were not being, and everyone would yell, fed. And there's some truth there. So if you're not being fed as you grow in these stages of faith, you will find other places to be fed. So as leaders, we need to be aware of that and be more attentive to these stages of growth as a disciple.
Thanks, Jeff. I got a question from the chat box that says, how do you see the development of class leaders who should be disciples as part of the process? You know, and what I'll name too is that on this call, we have clergy, we have laity on here as well. So that a class leader is a specific term for a part of the discipleship system. Maybe, so if you wanted to address that, or maybe address what is the role of just laity involvement, leadership development in this discipleship process?
Sure. Class leaders or small group leaders or cell group leaders are all extremely important for any discipleship system or pathway. As your church grows, it's actually the piece that will help your church continue to grow, whether or not you can keep up with staffing or not, right? It's the laity and the small groups that will continue to help your church grow in a healthy ways and maintain that pastoral care and that hospitality and those kind of pieces that you find important for discipleship. Your small groups or your class groups are the way that your church can grow beyond what you think you might be able to. And that is the role of the pastor, is to equip the laity to find their spiritual gifts and to use them in church. It's not the pastor's job to do all the disciple making. We're in this together. What we found with churches who go through this creating of a discipleship system is that it's not dependent on the pastor, that the people have to own it for themselves. And what's really powerful about that is pastors come and go. But when the church has created a discipleship system that all of the leaders, laity, everyone understand and buy into, the pastor leaves, a new pastor comes in. If the pastor's aware of discipleship systems, they just say, tell me about your discipleship system, and you keep going. You don't have to rethink mission and vision all over again because it's the work of the people. So it's a very healthy process for churches to go through and for leaders to do it together and own it together.
Thanks, Jeff. I'd say too, the role of a shepherd is not, you never see shepherds force feeding the sheep, in the way of, there is a leading to the pastures that, we're not trying to shove the grass down people's throats. So understanding our role as clergy in that, I think, would be important. Kama, thank you for that chat reference in Phil Maynard's Discipleship on YouTube. So appreciate the comments in the chat box. Jeff, let's move on to the next one just for time's sake.
Sure.
And we can always circle back at the end for further questions on intentional discipleship systems. But keep going, friend. You're doing great.
Okay. So now we've all been thrust into this digital world of discipleship. With COVID-19, there's going to be a myriad of things that we need to think through as a church. At umcdiscipleship.org, we have tried to list a lot of the resources that would be helpful to you in this moment in time. The online worship, there's a lot of tips there for that, as well as the debate around online communion and love feast options. We've been listing how to do small groups using technology, which is new to a lot of us. Want to really begin to think about worship the same way you would in your church setting. So you still need to think about new people. How will you know that there's new people? First-time visitors and follow-up. How will you do that as a church? So like right now, we're just trying to get online, but we need to also begin to think about the disciple formation of new people. And there are ways of doing that online as well. So how are we connecting them to online small groups? How are we connecting them to generosity and giving online? Because that's part of being a disciple. How are we connecting them in service to community in new and unique ways? Because service is an important part of discipleship. How are we going to do new members, orientations, and welcoming of new disciples? Are we keeping track of who wants to be baptized for when we do return back, or what children have been born, and the baptisms that we'll need to do when we get back? There's safe sanctuary policies for online gatherings as well that we need to follow. So all of these are at umcdiscipleship.org, as well as the basics of how do you do Holy Week, Easter, how do you equip parents to do these things at home. So all of those we've been collecting, and that's something that I would kind kind of welcome ongoing feedback. If there's a great discipleship need out there related to how we're doing digital discipleship that we haven't addressed yet, I would love to hear from you with your ideas or ways that we can support your church. One really big one is the giving piece, and churches who have never done online giving are now working towards that. But with the current economic downturn, are we also taking this time to look at our managing our church budgets? So there's a resource on there for that. There's a lot on there around this new CARES Act. If you haven't heard of the CARES Act, it is available to nonprofits as well. And we are partnering with Horizons to help churches work through the application process. This would help with, it's a loan initially for your payroll and your staff, includes your benefits. And as long as you don't lay off people or let people go during the time of that loan, the loan becomes a grant that's 100% forgivable. So there are guidelines that churches would have to follow, but it's an immediate help with the financial piece of the church around your staffing and some pieces. So we have resources there at umcdiscipleship.org around the new CARES Act and making sure we follow those pieces. So that's just a little bit of what we have at our COVID-19 responses. We also have, how to do children's ministries, how do you do youth ministries, all these kind of things online in this new digital moment that we're in. So let me pause there around kind of COVID-19 and digital discipleship and see what kind of questions you might have or ideas for me for what's not currently there that you know of.
Any questions, friends, on this? I know one of the things that I think this reminds me of with COVID-19 things is, does your church, or you as a disciple, do you value discipleship or faith as an everyday event? One of the things that I think we've discovered when we think about discipleship in this time is, are we as churches providing the resources that we need to help people engage in their walk with Jesus, or whatever way you want to describe discipleship, beyond just Sunday morning? So Jeff, could you comment to, some of what you're seeing with that, or what are some resources that might help people engage or help people engage in sort of daily discipleship values? I think for me, that's one thing that if your church wasn't as set up for this is something that we need to begin to think about. What are the types of tools that we're offering, resources that we can offer beyond the Sunday morning experience for discipleship? Any comment or further reflection on that?
Sure, yeah. One of the pieces that we have in the resource about discipleship systems is that, worship is an important part of discipleship, but a maturing disciple is growing towards worshiping every day, not just on Sunday. So that's a stage of growth for discipleship around worship, and that's really important. What we're seeing with this COVID-19 crisis is it's helping us realize that we can still be the church without our buildings. And matter of fact, the church by definition isn't a building; it's the people. So the church, I saw one meme recently that, the church isn't empty, it's just been deployed. So we need to think about that as disciples. Wherever we are, in whatever circles we live and move, that's where God has called you to make a difference. That's where God has called you to be a disciple and to make disciples. What we're also learning in this crisis is people are more open to hearing the good news of Jesus than ever before. People are hungry and craving community and interaction. I don't know if any of you have gone for a walk recently, but suddenly neighbors who never talk to you are talking to you. I mean, I think people are open in this moment to just community and conversation. So I think what becomes really important is, how do we equip our disciples for engaging our communities and having these conversations in healthy ways? One of the resources also on seeallthepeople.org is a guide to community engagement. And it talks about, as disciples, how do we model discipleship? How do we do it in an authentic way, but also begin to have conversations with people, not for the purpose of getting them to our churches, but because God loves them. Like, that's it. And I think people are hungry for that more than ever. They're really looking, I think they will growingly look to the church for, when all this COVID-19 strips away everything, what's left? What's the meaning left over? And friends, we have something to say on that. So I don't know if I answered your question there, Michael, but yeah, I think any ways that we can continue to equip disciples in their own faith formation during this time is important, whether it's spiritual disciplines, daily scripture reading, daily prayer, and sending out those kind of pieces to help them continue to grow as disciples is really important in this time.
And I've tried to keep encouraging people, not just in the high tech stuff, you know, in terms of online resources, but really think through what are the low tech things that anybody can do, not just for you as clergy, but anybody. And you know, Jeff, I'd be curious, what are some of the things that you're seeing low tech wise that anybody can do? I'll name one. You know, a simple phone call, friends, right? Reestablishing the phone tree. And again, as a clergy person, just not doing all the calls yourself, but helping create this environment of, hey, we're the church and we care about each other. So it's not just that the pastor's calling, but we're calling each other. Jeff, can you think or throw out any other ideas? Or if you've got an idea, friends, throw it in the chat box. Low-tech ideas of discipleship, too. We'd love to talk through those, as well as all the digital resources that are available. Go ahead, Jeff, you got an idea?
Yeah. One of the resources we did, I'm one of the writers around Chuck Knows Church and the committee, and we brought Chuck back to do these things we can do, because everyone's looking for basic things we can do. So on the UMCdiscipleship.org, there's 20 short little videos that Chuck does around things we can do. And most of them are exactly that. They're low tech. They are phone calls, snail mail, you know, writing a letter to someone. They are prayer walks as you're out, you know, walking, begin to pray for your neighbors. Prayer walls, like at the edge of your church, could you create kind of chicken wire or places where people can write prayers, tie it, you know, to the edge of your property as a church. So we had 20 kind of ideas that you could begin to think about. How do you engage your community in times of isolation? One of the ideas was create social bands, which is like kind of a phone chain of families and neighborhoods that can keep an eye on each other and connect with one another. So yeah, check out Things We Can Do is the 20 videos that we came up with, and most of them are very much low tech ideas.
Cool. And I'll say this one interesting comment, and then let you take it on to the next phase. One of the things in my neighborhood, don't ever, you know, lose sight of the power of momentum or the sound of a crowd. Every night at 8 p.m., my neighborhood howls like wolves. I have no idea. And it's funny, they started it a couple days ago, and I think they put it out on the community bulletin board online. I really don't pay attention to that stuff. But I hear, because it's been nicer weather, the windows are open, at 8 p.m., all I hear is a bunch of wolves. And every night, I mean, it is loud. You can hear it. It woke up my son, who was trying to go to bed at 8 o'clock, and he came down scared.
Oh my.
He was like, "What's that?" And we're like, "It's just our neighbors howling, you know. And I just think about like the weird things that we do in our culture that just people are willing to sign on and just be a part of, you know,
Yeah.
just that community feel, you know. And that had nothing to do with money, technology. It's just a bunch of weirdos howling outside their windows. So
Yeah.
get creative, friends. Never lose sight of what can be done with
Yeah.
people. So
And that's the one thing, as horrible as this crisis is, the creativity that's coming out of it is beautiful. The block parties where at 5:30 people are cranking up the music and dancing on their front porch. One of the ideas we came up with is let's do Christmas caroling, but obviously stay 6 to 8 feet back. But those who are musically inclined, let's share it with the neighborhood and go around and sing some Beatles tunes and get people just share some joy with one another. So a lot of amazing ideas coming out of this, and it just tells me people are craving community and
right.
belonging, and connection with other people.
I see. Thanks for all the not weirdos. We howl from Montana at 8 p.m. to be connected. No,
That's
no
awesome.
offense,
Yeah.
weirdos. No,
And
but yeah, the chat box shares some links of how it got started. Shout out to healthcare workers, and I know Nancy Boswell. I know at least is one that has served in that world too. Is that right, Nancy? So there might be some other people on the call. So we appreciate you not only in that field but in ministry as well. So thanks for the resource and folks. That's fun.
Yeah, how can we as a church be a blessing to those on the front lines right now? There's a lot of ways, and just simple things. If you are making a grocery run, we're trying to do less and less grocery runs. Are you reaching out to your elderly neighbor or your neighbors and just saying, I'm going, do you need something? So that less of us are going, and we can be there for one another. So lots of great ideas coming out of that. So.
Good. Keep going, Jeff.
All right. So now I want to shift to what's next. Thinking about hopefully after the crisis. Some thoughts that we're working on and resources that we're working on now for that moment in time that I'd like to encourage you to think about. We're guessing that online worship isn't going to go away, that some people are going to really appreciate that. So will we continue to do it with quality? Will we continue to connect them to our discipleship system? And I would say also connect them back into the community once in a while. So encourage them to join a small group in person, or come out for a celebration at the church when this is all over. So online is not, I don't think it's going to go away. We're pretty sure we're going to see a surge in worship attendance after this, similar to what we saw in 9/11. Will it be a small bump? Or will we be ready to meet them where they are at that moment in time? So we're looking at some sermon series and things that we can lift up, but you can begin to think through this too. A sermon series called Don't Go Back to Normal. This crisis, there are things awakened in you. Don't lose those things. Like connect those back to our faith and our faith formation. When we stripped it all away and all we had was our family and God, we realized that was enough. Let's not lose that on the other side of this crisis. Will we be ready for those first-time visitors? Will we be ready to connect them into the community and get them involved as disciples? Are we continuing to plan for community engagement beyond this? We all this wonderful creativity, it would be a shame for it just to go away once we're back to normal. Why should it go away? This is the beautiful part of connecting with one another. I think I mentioned earlier baptisms. Are you keeping track now so that you can have a celebration of baptisms when you get back? Whether it's 1 or 12, doesn't matter. That's a celebration that we need to be ready for. I would just say looking now to plan for worship and quality worship series that meets people where they are. we are looking at unprecedented unemployment. So on the other side of this, there will be businesses that will not reopen. There'll actually be churches that will not reopen. Will we be ready as the church to minister to people who are unemployed, people who are depressed, people who lost someone during this crisis who we are now doing memorial services for? Are we ready to help them through grief when we're back together? So these are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about now and planning for now, so that when we get back together, we won't lose the things that we've learned and connect with the new people that we've been connecting with. So those are the kind of things that we're brainstorming about, what kind of resources local churches would need as we get back together. So let me pause there for questions or ideas around that.
Everyone looks so reflective right now. I see the wheels turning in your brains.
It's called Zoom fatigue.
Zoom fatigue. No, I mean, you're asking some great questions, Jeff. I mean, this is, I think, some good things for us to consider. You know, that's a deep question. Who will we be? What will we do? What are the things that we need to start brainstorming and creatively thinking about for, you know, when we return? You know, in terms of that language.
Yeah, I'd say just in the area of grieving, does your church have a system in place for that? One of the churches I served had a very active Stevens ministry program, which has an excellent process for grieving. Several books that you send out and you talk to people with at various stages of grief, you know, 1 to 2 to 3 years out. This is the kind of planning we can do now so that we're prepared to help people when we get back together.
So a couple questions that just came in through the chat box. We'll kind of take them one as they come. Nancy asks, what are the scriptures that you're using for the Don't Go Back to Normal sermon series? Are you on that writing team, or have you been part of that creation process?
We're at the very beginning. So
okay.
The idea was just birthed like yesterday. So we haven't started writing those. But I'm assuming we're going to do probably 5 sermon series options that would be available to churches. And again, we created in such a way that you could edit it and make it your own, make it contextualized for your church. So no, we haven't really started, but that idea was just brought up in a Zoom meeting yesterday. But yeah, I mean, I can reflect a bit. You know, whether or not you were a follower of Jesus before this, or you're beginning to ask kind of faith questions, I think this kind of crisis awakens stuff in us, reconnects us to the divine in ways that if we can, as leaders and pastors, and begin to articulate that for people and tell them, this is what you're feeling, this is what we were all feeling, and connect it back to our faith and faith in God and one another. I think we're gonna be able to build some lasting community with both our current folks as well as people brand new to the faith. So I think it's a real opportunity here. I always found when I did sermon series, I often looked to the secular world for ideas. And we would do this for this series as well. One of the best sermon series that we did in one of my churches was a Beatles sermon series. And it started because I went to a Beatles cover band somewhere, and I noticed that people of all generations were dancing and singing to this music. And I thought, what is universal about this Beatles music that touches people deeply? So we did this series that started with, I think we did it in order of the Beatles, but that music was so spiritual in ways that it's connecting with people in ways that we don't even understand. So we were trying to unpack, why is it so powerful? So I would encourage you to start thinking like that. What are the things we're experiencing in the general population that we're saying, what is so universal about that moment that makes everyone respond? And then begin to explore back to the teachings of Jesus and the gospel messages, because you can always find something beautiful and important to the core of our very being in some things that Jesus said that can tie right back to, oh, that's why we're feeling the way we're feeling there. So we'll try to tap into some of those kind of things. We'll probably look at some of the really positive stories that came out of this and show those video clips and say, why did this bring us joy in this moment? And unpack why it worked so well for so many people. Why did this piece get 1 million likes or shares or hits during the crisis? And what does it tell us about us as humans, us as beings who long for the divine? So those are the kind of things we'll try to explore in those sermon series, and I would encourage you to do the same.
Here's another great brainstorm question for that sermon series, Jeff, for you. Stephanie asks, how can we inspire folks that going back to normal shouldn't be their goal? What does a new normal look like? That's a great
Good.
question. You want to comment on that? How can we inspire folks that, quote, going back to normal shouldn't actually be the goal?
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, there's so many aspects of that, but the one that I'll lift up is the time. So I guess there's two sides of this coin. The time that I've had with my family over the past few weeks has been just priceless, invaluable. We've spent more quality time than we'd care to. But why would I want to lose that? Why would we want that to go away? Why wouldn't we be planning to be intentional and do this again and stay connected? The other side of that coin, though, is we're also in contact with people who are completely alone during this time. So singles, people who have just lost a loved one and are home alone. And for them, they need people, they need community. And this crisis has been very difficult for them. Many of them have been, if they weren't depressed before, are battling depression. So that's a real question for us as faith leaders to say, how do we help them articulate what they went through and what it was like to be alone? I think of my mom, who is normally alone all the time anyway. However, there was something about now we have to shelter in place that it made it even more lonely. Even though she's alone a lot of the times anyway, she's by herself. But she said it's harder. So we could unpack that and help them articulate what was that about, and how in our faith community do we want to be there for those people and do that better.
Cool, thank you. Another, I guess, a little bit more practical question coming from Mike. And I love asking, I'll ask Jeff you this question: where can we get money? No, this is good. Now, are there places where we can get money to get top quality equipment for online services?
Ooh.
I have a comment about that, but Jeff, I'm always willing to take your money if you want to give it to me. So
yeah, unfortunately we don't have grants for the equipment for online worship. Maybe UMCOM does, but I honestly don't know. However, yes, you want to build towards quality online worship. However, I have seen some pretty amazing online worship, and I know they're using 3 iPhones and 3 little tripods. You know, it has gotten much cheaper, and the editing apps have gotten much better. So I would, yes, continue to work on your quality and improving your equipment and such, but be authentic and work on the quality with whatever you have now. I think people are appreciating the authenticity of the worship being created in this moment. So I think that's okay. And don't think it's less than. Stick with the authenticity and just slowly learn and begin to improve your online. I don't think it takes a lot of money, but just slowly work to improve it as you go.
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, thanks, Stephanie, for putting in the chat box a link to a UMCOM resource. So check out your chat box, everybody, for that link, and we'll try and include that in a follow-up when we send out this recording. From the Mount Sky Annual Conference, we'll say we're just in conversation now on that topic about providing some resources. You may be familiar with the Culture of Call grant that kind of comes out at this time. And in conversation with Annie Arnoldy, our Superintendent of Leadership Development and Director of Connectional Ministries, we've been trying to think of shifting that a little bit into being more of a culture of community grant to help with churches that if they need to apply for some resourcing and funding for some of these tools, that we would turn the Culture of Call grant in this season into a culture of community grant. So we'll try and get that out as quick as we can. It's just an early conversation now. So yeah, I can't promise anything, but it's in the works of what we're trying to do to kind of repurpose some of our grant money for some different purposes in this season. So hopefully that is a help to you. So be on the lookout for that. That should be coming out hopefully sooner than later. And I'll follow up with our leadership team about, you know, again, this folks asking for some of those resources. And
I'd add, there's been some real beauty in being the deployed church in this moment in time and thinking about that. Make sure you, with your leaders, you think about this is a really rich moment to rethink everything and to say what was essential during this time and what wasn't, what things can we let go of, and if God forbid one of the things that you as a church have to let go of is your building, which I think is a reality across the country. There's going to be churches that close. Don't let it end there. Think creatively and say, how can we continue to be the church in a new way? One of the most vibrant churches I visited in Texas was a church. It was on the back deck of someone's house. There was probably 40 people gathered for worship. And it was one of 5 churches in that neighborhood happening at the same time on the back deck of someone's house. Very low budget, very low tech. They were essentially campus churches, but in a single neighborhood. And I thought how beautiful that was. And it's not about the building at all. So as difficult as that might be, encourage your leaders to say, hey, this is an opportunity to be a deployed church in a new way, to let go of things, but be more vibrant in the process. So you'll need some time to mourn, yes, but then shift to, okay, now what is God calling us to in this moment? And don't let it stop you. Just let it change you. Like, you know, Paul being told you can't go here, no problem, I'll go there, right? So these can be very difficult times, but they can be great opportunities for the church.
That's a good word. Thanks, Jeff. And I appreciate, shout out to Roger in the chat box as well, of putting some good things for us to consider about, you know, authenticity, being willing to admit that, you know, we don't have all the answers, but we're willing to walk alongside of people. That's a quick summary. Roger said it much better in the chat box, but looks like Stephanie put a new link up because the first one didn't work. I'll say too, as we wrap up, some of the things that Jeff, you mentioned in terms of what we need to do moving into the future, or what, beyond COVID-19. Next week at this time, we'll be talking with a Facebook Live expert who will be helping us walk through that. If you want to continue it isn't just about getting worship online, but it's really about using your communications and social media to engage your community. So next week we'll be with a Facebook Live expert. 2 weeks from now, we're meeting with the CEO of an organization called Good Grief, where we're going to be talking about the grief process and really thinking through how to help people walk through this. So we're really trying to take a really large approach of some of the resources that we're offering to each other in this time, some of the nuts and bolts, but also the larger things. So Jeff, I just want to give you a final word for us of encouragement. If you could close us with a word of prayer. And the last thing that I'll say before Jeff closes us out is that, if you are searching at, seeallthepeople.org, the UMC Disciple, I put it
Discipleship.org.
UMCdiscipleship.org. Friends, if you're seeing some resources that you want to get, but, budget's a little tight right now, we understand that. Look, you just need to reach out to us, okay? I'm going to put our email address in the chat box now. If you need some resources or some support, that's why we're here, okay? So email us at vitality@mtnskyumc.org. We're here to support you, here to encourage you, and provide any resources or support we can. So reach out to us if you need some budget support on getting some of these resources. So Jeff, why don't you close us out with a word and with a word of prayer?
Yeah, so thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. And again, Discipleship Ministries is your shared ministry dollars at work. So please use us. That's what we're here for. For annual conference season, we were preparing some new resources. One is forming disciples through worship. One is how do you measure this, right? How do you measure discipleship is always a tough one. Another is basics of faith formation. And the last one was doing community engagement with cultural sensitivity. So if your community looks nothing like your church, how do you do that well? Those will be digital bundles that'll be available during the time that annual conference season normally happens. We'll also send samples, hard copies, to Michael and the leaders in your conference. And if you want to order some of those, we could do that through the conference as well. And lastly, I just say, my email is jcampbell@umcdiscipleship.org. And I would welcome your feedback, your ideas, ways that we can better support you. So please just be in contact. Let this be the beginning of a conversation. And whenever you have ideas or ways that we could create something that would be helpful for the greater church, please let us know. So let us pray. Gracious and loving God, I thank you so much for your leaders that you have called and raised up, that are on this call seeking you and seeking ways to be disciples and make disciples in real, authentic ways, particularly in this difficult time.